this week I've got Joker, which I think is going to be probably one of the more divisive films for audiences of this year. It premiered at the Venice Film Festival, and it took home the top prize there. So a ton of buzz coming out about it to start, right? But if you looked a little bit deeper into the critics' responses, you'll notice that the women and people of color who reviewed the film were concerned about it. And I'm sure there were other people who were concerned about it who don't fall into those categories, but there was certainly a trend amongst those groups. And after having seen it, I kind of understand why. So let's approach this from a couple angles. First of all, let's just talk about the fact that this movie is called Joker. It is Batman's greatest villain, his nemesis. He's probably one of the greatest supervillains in comic book history, in that he's not even necessarily super. He doesn't have any crazy powers. He's just a criminal mastermind and crazy. We've seen amazing portrayals of him already, right? Like Heath Ledger's Joker is legendary. Jack Nicholson was amazing as Joker. Mark Hamill as the voice of Joker in like the animated version. It's a character that is very intertwined with Batman. And the second you say Joker and you set it in this world of Batman, there are certain expectations. And I think it's fine to like vary from them a little bit, I get that, okay, fine, it's a very cartoonish character in many senses, even the live action ones. It's a character known for like using chattering teeth bombs and silly clown stuff. So cool, you want to do a like slightly more grounded version, fine, totally understand that. But I think the issue is there are expectations, and this is so far from anything that we know about any sort of version of Batman, right? That it doesn't feel like a Batman movie, but you've called it that, and therefore you put this on yourself. Like if you had called this anything else, you'd be like, oh, this is actually a pretty decent anti-hero movie. But because you've called it Joker and you've made this character this super famous character, you didn't deliver on that. And that was frustrating to me. I think my favorite thing, I don't want a Joker backstory, I think is what it comes down to. Like, my favorite thing about the Heath Ledger Joker is that every time he told the story of how he got his scars, it was different. He's like, you want to know how I got these scars? And you didn't know his motivation. You didn't know where he came from, which I think made him a more compelling villain in that sense, because it was a mystery, right? Like, you don't know what his weakness is. And in this one, he's just someone who is mentally ill. And I think the way they handled it was dangerous. And look, I'm going to acknowledge, like, we live in dark times. Like, it's rough. Mental health and mental illness are very complicated subjects, on a wide spectrum of issues. But the way this film treats it is like it's a justification for things, as opposed to, it sucks. He gets bullied. You see it in the trailers. Like the system is not like helping him. The system has failed him. But is that a reason to go killing people? In that case, like, how are we not all living in the darkest of dark? I mean, we kind of are, but, and I think the unfortunate real world parallel is, and why it's weird that they kind of acknowledge this, is like, I remember the Aurora, Colorado shootings. I remember being scared to go see The Dark Knight in theaters, and I was kind of, tense seeing Joker going into it. I was glad that the screening I was at, like, had security and wanted people. But not every public screening is going to have that. And the fact that it's also a Batman film, in that universe. And I don't know if anyone remembers, they tried to use mental illness as a legal defense. And it was determined that the shooter was mentally ill, but legally sane. And I'm like, are you glorifying this in a sense in this film? Like, they make the Joker a hero in some ways. He's the protagonist. And there are plenty of films with anti-heroes where you can still do it and be like, hey, I'm not saying I condone this necessarily, but this is a compelling story. And then let's talk about compelling stories, because I didn't feel like it was a particularly compelling story. It was nothing. I have seen it before. I've seen it before, and then you call it Joker and expect me to feel like it's reinvented or brand new. I'm like, these things are at odds with each other. And then, Joaquin Phoenix, I'm not a huge fan of. I will acknowledge he has had some great performances, like Gladiator. He's great. Also, as someone who's probably a bit on the mentally unstable side. Robert De Niro is in this film. Zazie Beetz is there. Joaquin Phoenix was hard to watch. And they're like, oh, it's a transformative performance, this and that. And, he got lost in the character. I kind of call bullshit on that a little bit. Yes, he lost a bunch of weight for it. Like, we've seen other actors and actresses do that. We've seen Christian Bale, who played Batman, do that for Machinist. That doesn't make your performance great. That just means you lost a lot of weight for it. it was a little bit cartoonish and not in a good way. Yeah, I was not into it. Todd Phillips is the director. Also, Todd Phillips needs to stop talking about this movie. Like, every time he opens his mouth and gives like a soundbite, I like this movie even less. You know, he talks about, I can't make comedies anymore because the world's so sensitive these days. It's like, sure, no, you can make a comedy. It just has to be funny. And maybe, like, you know, it's no longer funny, and it was never funny, but it's now at least no longer acceptable to like shit on oppressed groups. Nor should it ever been funny or fun to do that. And in fact, then you make a film about like, we're supposed to feel bad for this character because he's being bullied. Like, do you not see the issue here? At the end of the day, just unoriginal to me, and did not feel like a Batman movie, but set itself, you know, a movie in the realm of Batman or in the world of Batman, even though it's calling itself that. So you're riding those coattails. And then, like, let's talk again with the mental health thing. Like, I was thinking about this. I was talking to someone today, and they were like, I have a 14-year-old son. I don't think I'm going to let him see it. And in my mind, I was like, well, why not? Because I remember seeing plenty of like R-rated films when I was 14, like sneaking in and doing whatever. And then I thought about it more. I was like, no, wait. Do not let your son see this. Because, you know, impressionable minds, independent of age, are going to see this movie. And the way that they've glorified kind of the violence and the rejection of help and all that stuff, like, it's not a good thing. And it's not a compelling thing, and it's just not, it's not the society I want to live in. And like, there's a reason that we like go to the movies to escape and stuff like that. And I'm like, are you trying to incite this? Like, are you trying to have this movie like transcend and do like, I hope that's not the intention, because it is, at the end of the day, just a movie. And, you know, much like people are like, well, video games cause violence. Like, I don't think you can say movies cause violence necessarily, or video games cause violence in that way. But there are impressionable people out there. And if these are the values you're communicating, like, no, I don't think you should let, like, kids see this, you know, or young adults see this. I didn't particularly enjoy seeing it, honestly. And I will say, like, I have recorded this review so many times over and over because much like I was tense and in kind of fear seeing this movie, I've seen the reaction to people who were critical of Joker, and the fear is that, like, well, you're not listening to the concerns, you just backlash immediately. And those are the exact people I'm concerned about seeing this film, where you're just like, you're not looking at the actual substance behind it. You're just kind of like, being told this thing, or whatever, like, or you're knee-jerk reactioning, right? Like, well, you can't not like this film. I'm like, well, okay, you can like this film if you want to like this film. You know, everyone is entitled to their own opinion. But I didn't like this film, and I didn't like the way it made me feel, and I didn't appreciate the values of it. And again, just as a film, I didn't find it particularly interesting or compelling, you know? So those are all the factors for, but then you live in this fear of the backlash of that, right? And I don't think I'd ever attack a person for being like, well, I loved Joker. I'd be like, I disagree with you. But the extremes of the reactions, I think, are what are scary and what Joker is kind of potentially going to feed into, and not in a good way. So for me, personally, I'm only going to give this 2 out of 5. You know, I think there are much better portrayals of this character because you have, and again, they have chosen to associate themselves with Batman, and there are very historic, you know, amazing performances of Joker, and I think those are preferable for me. You know, I could have seen a world in which they had not called it that and then revealed at the end that it was, you know, Joker, and you'd be like, ooh, you know, kind of like how Ridley Scott did with like the Alien movies recently, where it was like, oh, is it an Alien movie? Of course you know it's an Alien movie. But there was kind of that reveal at the end. You're like, okay, fine, all right. Like, that could have been more interesting to me. I think overall I found like I was basically apathetic towards the film itself, but I'm concerned about the reaction to it. And that's not a good place to be in. So 2 out of 5 for me. But again, if you like it, like, that's fine. But just please don't be inspired by the actions of the Joker.